Hey everyone, I am Kathy Reiswitz, and you're watching The Kathy Reiswitz Show. Today I'm joined by Gina Luttrell. She is editor-in-chief of the fantastic libertarian lady blog Thoughts on Liberty. Gina, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
Very, very well. So I wanted to talk first about this article that we both shared on Facebook. Corporate advertisers are hijacking girl power to sell products, and I'm totally into it. I just put me too, but you had some more specific thoughts on the power of advertising to create social change. So do you want to kind of like sum up the article and then kind of your reservations?
Yeah, so the article is basically saying, well, it's responding to critiques of, like, feminist critiques of advertising that kind of hijacked the girl power idea to sell products. And a really good example of a company that has come out under fire is Dove for their Real Beauty commercials, but of course Dove is selling beauty products. So it's kind of, a lot of feminists feel like these companies aren't really engaging in like things that really empower women. They're just using the idea of female empowerment to sell their products. And so this idea, this article is kind of addressing those concerns and saying, you know, yeah, that's what they're doing, but they're also doing really cool and really good things. They use the Always commercial as an example. For people who may not be familiar, the Always commercial is like it's like a 5-minute spot. It's really long, and it gets a bunch of people in front of a camera and says, you know, run like a girl, and you know they're like flailing their arms and being goofy, and then you get these younger girls, and they're like run like a girl, and they're just like powering through, and they're, you know, running. And like the actual advertisement is very minimal. Like there's just like an Always, you know, logo at the end. And the writer was like, this is great because they're delivering the message of female empowerment to people in this sort of mass-produced way. And my thoughts on that was that girl power marketing is just another kind of segmented marketing, and you're talking to people who already agree with you. So for someone for whom that commercial appeals, to buy that product is someone who already believes in, you know, female empowerment, and you know the idea that like the sort of like a girl statement as a pejorative is a bad thing. And I'm not really sure how much overt messaging like that really contributes to people changing the way that they perceive women and girls. I have seen some commercials that I think are better, and there's not really an overt message. It's just like, so to contrast, like the typical like household product commercial is a woman with a bunch of kids like running around her, and she's like, oh god, this sucks, and I have Bounty, it makes it easier, and like they wipe up. And like the commercials that are actually very good, I think, are commercials that take that scenario and put a dude in them, or you know, a commercial that takes, you know, someone's driving this truck and you know it gets all muddy and there's like the inspirational music, you know how truck commercials are, and then like a woman comes out and it's not like a huge thing, it's just a woman construction worker or a woman, you know, architect or, you know, whatever. Like I think that advertising, and I realize that I'm being very long-winded here, and so I'll wrap it up, but I think that advertising does have the ability to establish what is normal and what we see as normal. And I'm not convinced that the overt girl power stuff is helping, but I think that advertisers can have a positive impact if they look at the archetypes that they're selling and subvert them.
I think that's that's kind of the point that I was going to make, and I didn't get it out of your Facebook status, but it's very well articulated that you're right. The overt girl power message only works, and they're only going to use it if it appeals to people who are already bought into the message. And I like your point about the more subtle messaging. A good example of that when I was in Germany, I got to talk to the guy who ran Angela Merkel's re-election campaign, and she represents a party that's pretty conservative and for Germany. And so part of their campaign was to use ads that were very unusual for German politics. And one thing that they did was they had a home setting where it was a dad flipping pancakes with the kid looking on. And they wanted originally to only have the dad, but then they were like, oh, well, you know, we're conservatives, so the mom needs to be in the background, but she was like in the corner far away.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think normalizing what we want to see without that, you know, we're all on the same page. It's like, this is just a new page, you know. It's a page we don't see often enough, and it's not weird enough to be alienating, but it's not common enough to be perpetuating stereotypes.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we need, I feel like, to accomplish. But another thing I wanted to talk about is I completely agree with you that, and I may be misstating what you're saying, but it sounds like what you're saying is that, you know, the feminists, not a monolith, but, you know,
the feminists
have a point about narrow patriarchal beauty standards and the I guess goodness or utility of advertising beauty products to women. At the same time, I think the feminists put themselves at a disadvantage, both to get their ultimate goals accomplished and just for a prosperous society, when they take a specifically anti-capitalist, anti-marketing stance. Because there's a difference between what people should want and then what they do. And while I might want everyone to buy organic paleo food and not slather their faces in makeup, me like criticizing the market for providing people those things and trying to sell it to them seems like a problem, a fool's errand first, and then just kind of, you know, a bad thing. So I feel like it would be great for individualist or libertarian feminism to take that middle road where we say it would be better if people wanted this other thing, but it's also very important that we keep the market free. And I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, so I mean, I have a couple of different thoughts. The first is, like, I think that I don't know how prevalent specifically anti-capitalist feminism is, because here's the thing, like, if you're talking to someone who is of the opinion that that capitalism is inherently patriarchal, then destroying capitalism is part of their feminist project, right?
Right.
So you're kind of fighting someone on two different ideological fronts, right? And I think that there is space for libertarian feminists to come in and say, free markets, you know, as opposed to capitalism, if you want to draw the distinction between the two, free markets aren't inherently patriarchal, they're inherently egalitarian. And we can use that mechanism to further equality between sexes, between races. I do believe Marx thought that that's what was going to happen. And, you know, you can appeal to them from that perspective as well. So that's usually how I go about it, but arguing with people who are anti-capitalistic is incredibly difficult, because they have a framework of thinking that requires you to deconstruct a lot of what they think about capitalism and free markets in the first place. So it's not like you're talking to someone and you're speaking the same language, because you're not. You have to break down what it is that they're saying and how they view capitalism and how they view free markets before you can start talking about an extension of that to egalitarianism, I think. Um, the second thing that I wanted to say is that it's really interesting because this reminds me a lot of this conversation about how advertisers can shape society. Reminds me a lot of a piece that we ran at Thoughts on Liberty a few weeks ago called Libertarian Paternalism, or like what is libertarian paternalism. It was not my piece, but the idea behind this article and behind the academics who were talking about this is that institutions and individuals, can nudge society and individuals to make choices that are good for them and nudge society in such a way that it shapes in a particular way. The interesting thing about that, and to bring it back to the anti-capitalism point, is that people aren't, like advertisers and companies, for the most part, aren't really interested in social good outside of what their product delivers, but they're interested in making money, right? And I think that a lot of mainstream feminists don't understand that, and I think that, again, it's a place for libertarian feminists to come in and say, okay, how can we use the profit motive to incentivize people to make good decisions and to advertise in such a way? But gender segmented marketing is actually a huge moneymaker, and it makes a huge difference in profit margins for all kinds of things like beauty products, toys, all this sort of thing. There's a great article or a great video, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, a great BuzzFeed video that explains like the history of gender segmented marketing. And it's not about enforcing gender roles, it's about making money. And that, I see that as particularly difficult to break down. And I think that both libertarian feminists and anti-capitalist feminists have their work cut out for them if that's something that they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right about we've got to define our terms, and one huge weak spot of people who are pro-markets is that I feel like we either don't actually understand the arguments against capitalism,
right,
or we don't take them seriously enough, or we just don't bother to indicate that we understand. And I think that that's really alienating. It feels to me like there's a lot of, I see it in two places, a lot of anti-capitalist feminism. First is in these kinds of critiques where what I see oftentimes from feminists is, okay, the message is great of these kinds of commercials, but it's still capitalism. Mm-hmm. And the other place I see it is just in kind of a lot of feminism is academic, and academia tends to be anti-capitalist. Mm-hmm. And I feel like talking to those people, converting anti-capitalists is probably not something that's generally going to happen. I think there are a lot of people on the margins who are being exposed to anti-capitalist arguments and not really seeing them rebutted and not really seeing any alternative. Mm-hmm. And so for those people, I think that it's helpful to say, okay, here are the legitimate criticisms of capitalism. I agree. Like, these are legitimate criticisms. I think if by capitalism we mean the current distribution of capital, if we mean the mixed economy, then absolutely capitalism is patriarchal. And to deny that makes us look, ignorant and tone deaf.
Yeah.
And so to point out that you're right, there are two ways to deal with that. They're not mutually exclusive. You can go about it by trying to tear down capitalism, in which case you have all the problems with command economies, lack of innovation and prosperity. And or we can change the culture. And so advertising is part of that. Like we've said, it's not sufficient by any stretch of the imagination. But cultural critiques, reporting, consciousness raising, organizing, thoughts on liberty, like all that's part of that. And so, something that we need to sell. sell people on, I feel like, who are on the margins.
Absolutely. Speaking of capitalism, and this really doesn't have anything to do with capitalism, but your headphones match your shirt, and my headphones match my shirt. And I think that is just the most amazing thing. I just noticed that as you were talking, and I'm like, we are some color-coordinated Liberty ladies.
That's hilarious. Like, the writer would have never, ever noticed that, and the graphic designer was, like, the one to point it out.
Yeah, so I needed to point that out to everybody. But the problem is that, like, I'm not even sure that anti-capitalist feminists would describe capitalism as the current status quo. I think a lot of educated people understand that the status quo isn't really capitalism. It's closer to like a mercantile system, and but you talk about capitalism like in its bare definition of like the capital the means of production are owned by individual people. And you look at it from a feminist perspective, and they're like, okay, well, for the vast majority of history, that's all been men. And you're talking about institutions that are so entrenched in the way that we think that I can definitely understand how feminists would say there's no way that we can keep a capitalist system and make it egalitarian. It's like... It's okay, so this is a brief anecdote, but I promise I'll bring it back. So I was thinking the other day about how people call libertarians selfish. And I was kind of like, I don't know if that makes sense, because at least the libertarians that I know, and I hang out with like the SFL crowd a lot, I hang out with like a lot of, I hate using this term, but left-leaning libertarians. But then again, I know lots of right libertarians who are this way too. So, but the libertarians that I know and that I hang out with are smart, cunning, ambitious, driven people. And they could, if they were selfish people, they could very easily spend their time gaming the system and making a lot of money and screwing everybody else. But instead, they're working to break down the system in which they have an advantage. And I kind of see that as an incredibly selfless thing. By someone who is not, by people who are not motivated by profit margins or necessarily rational self-interest, but by purpose and by idealism. And to bring it back, and I did say I would, I kind of see that dichotomy as something that the anti-capitalist feminist struggles with, right? So as someone who believes in equality for women, you can say, okay, we can either break down the system that's inherently flawed and inherently biased against women, or we can go the cheap way and try to game the system. And to be honest, in a lot of ways, I have more respect for people who want to break down that system than I do people who want to game the system. And I think that girl power advertising is a way to kind of game the system. But if you look at the way that things are set up, that's not really going to be successful in your project of making women more equal participants and more equal members of society, because the problem from the anti-capitalist feminist perspective, and one that I sympathize with, is that the problem is in the very structure of how things are set up.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, we're about out of time, and I didn't know if we would have 30 minutes to say about this, but I'm not terribly surprised that we did, and your thoughts were so, I mean, Gina had about 2 seconds to prepare for this, and was incredibly on point, articulate, awesome. So thank you so much. I wanted to give you the last few minutes for the 2 people who don't know where to find you online. And I want to say, I said that Gina is a graphic designer, and she is, but she's also a very brilliant writer. So where can people find your stuff, Gina?
As you said at the beginning of the podcast, I run a website called Thoughts on Liberty. That's where most of my passion is right now. It is a women's libertarian website, all women, all the time. In my personal capacity, I'm an arts and entertainment columnist at Mike, and I also have a button column on The Blaze. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Gina, and thank you guys so much for tuning in. New videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Please like, comment, share, subscribe.